both, and I'll say, you guys will get tired of hearing this from me, but for us as council, and then for those speaking, we need to speak into the microphone so that the people that are watching online can, yeah, good job.
Carl.
Just,
She means me.
just don't, do you see what happened? Just don't swallow it. That would be really bad. So, okay, so let's call the meeting to order and roll call.
Rodriguez,
Here.
Bruner,
Here.
Ogaboom,
Here.
Levi,
Present.
Haverfield,
Here.
Skog.
Thank you. So, Michael, I think you have information for us, and we're on.
Mayor and council, thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule. Hopefully we can get done. There's a planning and zoning meeting at 6:30, so I hope that we can get done in about 45 minutes and there won't be any major conflict. What you have in front of you, I included a packet of information that was presented in the meeting this morning with Mr. Harriman and Mr. Olmsted, and then their information they provided back for us in case you were wondering how did it go. I thought it was a good meeting, we had a good conversation. They're helping us with filling out a questionnaire to help us jumpstart our process to go down that creating a new alternative so we can evaluate that consistently with all the other alternatives. So I think that was a good meeting, and I thought we ended up well. But today we're talking about it's related to that same issue. It's the city's comments on the integrated report. And with this, what I'm going to start, we're going to do this tag team. I'm going to ask Matt to kind of go through some of the technical processes and how it works. And then I'm going to come back and talk about a little bit of the history of NAMPA. Well, a little bit of NAMPA's previous city comments, and then what's some considerations on how we go forward, and then some comment options so that we know how to properly respond. The deadline is the 6th. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt real quick.
Thanks, Michael. So as Michael talked about, we're going to do just a little bit of background on the integrated report and kind of how it fits into everything today, because I think it's important. So some of you have seen this slide before, but really wanted to reiterate, okay, where does the integrated report fit in kind of the Clean Water Act process? So we go all the way back to the beginning. The public defines what we want our water bodies to be. We've had some discussion around this recently, but that's really codified in Idaho and the Idaho Water Quality Standards. That document, which the reference is up there on the PowerPoint, says for each water body that's in Idaho, these are the designated and beneficial uses that we expect it to meet. For Indian Creek, right by the Nampa treatment plant, that's cold water aquatic life and secondary contact recreation. That document solidifies all that. The next downstream step then is what we call the integrated report. It's sometimes called the 303D list, which actually references the Clean Water Act section. But essentially what DEQ does in this is they look at how we've defined beneficial use and says, okay, are all these water bodies meeting that use? So they'll say, for Indian Creek, for the Lower Boise River, for every water body in the state, are we meeting the uses we've set out for it? There's 5 categories, and we'll talk about those in just a second. But essentially it goes from we're all meeting the use to we're not meeting the use and we need to do something about it. And there's some gradations in between there. So coming out of that then, if the use is not being met, if we're not meeting that secondary contact recreation, cold water aquatic life, whatever the use is that's designated, then the water quality goals are developed and a TMDL is developed to go meet that use. So that says we're not meeting it, we need to put some actions in place to go meet it, and so we start with a TMDL development. For example, there's some on the Lower Boise River. There's also some on the tributaries to the Lower Boise River that have been completed over the last 5 to 10 years. So that's just kind of how this rolls down. And then finally, kind of the last step in the process, but I really think where folks start to focus on it is we end up with an MPDS permit, right? So that says we've developed a TMDL that sets limits for what point source dischargers to discharge into water bodies, and then those are reflected in a permit from EPA, or as of July 1st, the state's taking over that program. And so really why we're here talking today is that if we want to have some effect on what's in the permit, we really got to start upstream in the process, right? And so the integrated report is the first time on a recurring basis that we have the opportunity to provide that input. The Idaho Water Quality Standards is a document that's set. It's not to my knowledge, it's not revisited on an annual or biannual basis. The integrated report gets published every 2 years. And just, it'll come up when Michael talks about the numbering and when comments were submitted, but We're operating on the 2016 integrated report in 2018, so it's always like 2 years off on when they're releasing it. And that's just, they're collecting data in 2016, and by the time they write the whole report, Nate had it last time, it's like 600 and something pages. By the time they get it out, it's usually 2 years later, so we're always 2 years off on the report. So what is the integrated report? And we kind of just went through this. It informs the public on the health of Idaho's waters and streams and lakes. It is required by the Clean Water Act. It's conducted every 2 years. DEQ has been pretty good for about the last decade of having it out every 2 years. There was a gap between about 2005 and 2010 where one didn't come out. And like I said, it lists Idaho's water bodies for different conditions. It gets its name, sometimes called the 303D list, as those are the water bodies that are impaired and need a TMDL. So the quick synopsis of this year's report and the draft 2016 integrated reports, the DEQ always puts out for a public comment period. We have the opportunity to comment on it, and that's why we're here talking today. Honing in on the two areas that really kind of apply to the city. So the first one here, assessment unit, would be Indian Creek from Sugar Avenue to the Boise River. This is the assessment unit, the portion of the creek that the Nampa treatment plant discharges to. And it's got 4 items noted. The first one, nutrients is a aesthetic standard in Idaho. There's no set numeric criteria in the Idaho water quality standards. And so because of that, they list it as cause unknown, nutrient suspected. And that's their way of identifying phosphorus. That's kind of what that one's getting at. It is in category 5, which is if you will, the lowest level. It's impaired and needs a TMDL. The DEQ is proposing it moving to category 4B, which means there's actions already in place that are going to address that pollution. And that comes from the Lower Boise River phosphorus TMDL that was completed back in 2015. And so this is part of the reason we're here talking today, because this links to a lot of previous documents, and we want to make sure that whatever comments go in are the right comments from the city. Temperature is also listed in category 5 and saying it's impaired and needs a TMDL. That has not been completed, and so it stays in there. And then sediment bacteria for this section are actually listed as category 4A. They're proposed to be moved to category 4A. DEQ completed the bacteria and sediment TMDL for all the tributaries to the Boise River back in 2015 or 2016. And that then sets the limits for those. And so they're saying, hey, we've done that document. We're good to move this to category 4A, and that will start to help out here. And we'll talk about potential city comments on all these. And then similarly, the stretch from New York Canal, so basically when Indian Creek restarts at New York Canal down to Sugar Avenue, it's also listed for cause unknown, nutrient suspected, and then also temperature. And both of those are in category 5. So just a little background on the categories before I hand this over to Michael. Category 1 is it's in a pristine forest environment, roadless areas, so they assume it's okay because they don't go sample it. Category 2 is it's meeting its beneficial use. 3 is there's not enough data. 4 is, hey, there's plans in place that are helping to improve it. And then 5 is impaired. So it's 1's the best, 5's at the lowest, and that establishes how we look at the water bodies in the state. So before I kick it over to Michael to give some background on previous city comments, any questions on that?
Mayor King, if I could. So you said, Matt, the tributaries to the Boise River, and however, Indian Creek does not attach itself to the Boise River. So is the TMDL incorrect?
Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, so the tributary TMDL for sediment and bacteria actually looked at water quality in all of the tributaries, not just the connection to the Boise River. So we've got the phosphorus TMDL on the lower Boise that said what water quality is needed in the lower Boise for phosphorus to support its beneficial uses, and then established limits at the end of all the tributaries to meet that. Flip side of that is the tributary TMDL for sediment and bacteria that looked at actual water quality in those tributaries and said to meet that, here's what we need to do. So they looked up Indian Creek, they looked up 5, 10, 15 mile. And so there's a distinction there in how it's been looked at.
Okay, but without actually checking the water or making experiments on the water, if you will, they just go ahead and blanketed and said, this is what it is? That is how it's classified?
Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, they looked at that time and said, these are connected, these are surface water bodies, and they developed a TMDL that encompasses all of them.
Oh, I see, okay.
And without jumping to the answer, the city very easily meets all those limits established, and so it was not an area where we felt we needed to get into the details with them on that. They're orders of magnitude above what the city currently.
Yeah, right. And that's set forth by EPA and IDEQ.
Yep.
Right, and all you're,
Driven by DEP.
and all Brown and Culver are doing is just working off of their requirements, regulations, correct? Actually, you guys, Brown and Culver, did not investigate any further whether the TDM was incorrect or their report was incorrect?
Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, so for the sediment and bacteria TMDL and the tributaries, to my knowledge, the city did not participate in a great deal because the limits that were proposed were much, much higher than is currently even discharged to the treatment plant.
Oh, I see.
So it doesn't have, there's nothing that has to get installed to go meet that limit. And so
Yeah, right, okay.
the effort to go into that was maybe not worth it there, so.
Is it worth it now?
For that one, we're still not proposing any changes to that.
Oh.
For sediment or bacteria, those are, the plant currently meets them easily.
Oh, I see.
Phosphorus is the one I think we'll talk about a little
That's,
further.
yeah, that's it. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mayor Kling. Matt, does the integrated report only deal with surface water, or does it deal with subsurface hydrology as well?
Mayor, Councilman Haverfield, it only establishes the impairment for surface waters. So it does not look at groundwater specifically.
So the aquifer is not a part of the issue that we're dealing with?
It's not discussed. There's some discussion about how those two interact, but we don't look into, there's no listing for the Treasure Valley aquifer or anything like that.
Okay.
It's only surface water.
Thanks.
I don't see any further questions. Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate your work.
So now what do we do? So, first of all, what I'd like to do is go through previous city comments that we've issued on the integrated report over time, starting with the 2008. And the reason 2008, so a 2008 integrated report, the comments were issued in about 2010. Prior to 2008, the last integrated report was 2002. So we're starting with the integrated report that was issued in 2008, and what were the city's comments? And they're in fine detail in your handout. And I'm going to put them in a little bit more of a simpler context, I hope. But you certainly have them before you exactly as written. So essentially in 2008, the city's comment regarding, and I'm talking about temperature and phosphorus or nutrients. In the integrated report, it's referred to as nutrients. And so in 2008, the city offered some temperature data. We said, hey, we have some temperature data. And DEQ's response was, they're not aware of temperature limits for municipal NPDES permits. So in 2008, temperature was not an issue. We provided some coliform data that we had. At that point, DEQ comments are in general, the limits are based on E. coli, so coliform is not the concerned bacteria. And we also made a comment, the city made a comment, that it should be delisted that Indian Creek should be delisted for nutrients, oil, and grease. And we urged DEQ to delist Indian Creek at that time. DEQ's response was, in DEQ's opinion, Indian Creek should be delisted for nutrients, oil, and grease. And they submitted a use attainability analysis by an independent contractor, but EPA did not approve those changes. But they did say that it should be split into different assessment units. And that's kind of where that ended. We're in general agreement. In 2010, there was on the 2008 integrated report, this is where EPA in 2011, they made comments regarding the upper reaches of Indian Creek, where EPA says the stream is intermittent, that is not, just because the stream is intermittent, it is not a good cause to delist for sediment, fecal coliform, nutrients, and it should remain a category 5. So this is up above the New York Canal where everybody agrees it's already an intermittent, it just dries up, a big part of it. So EPA denied the delisting above New York Canal. DEQ returned the assessment unit to Category 5 for sediment, coliform, and nutrients pending what they identified a 2011 monitoring plan. Also, in the second one, another segment, EPA said just because it's intermittent is not a good cause to delist for temperature, nutrients, and sediment. So even though it dries up, temperature, you have to prove, and we could read, until DEQ develops, and this is in both of them, until DEQ develops an appropriate assessment tool for intermittent waters, this assessment unit shall remain in Category 5 for sediment, temperature, and nutrient eutrophication biological indicators. So what that means is DEQ submitted, EPA said, yeah, no. And DEQ returned those assessment units to Category 5 for temperature, again, pending more information in 2011. So EPA has stepped in on Indian Creek. So the next integrated report, the 2012 integrated report, the city also commented. And in this particular, and we commented in about 2014, the city commented. At this point, in this integrated report, Indian Creek and most of the city's comments have been about the segment from Sugar to the Mouth. Beyond that, not as much a city concern. They stated that at this integrated report, they relist it for nutrients and attempt to delist it for temperature. So in this case, the city said, if DEQ is listing for nutrients, was it an error? I mean, how was there data provided? And if it was an error, what's the original information that was based on the listing that allowed it to be now relisted? DEQ's response was, that was just a clerical error. That's where you're at. The city also commented, does the city have new data since 2008 relative to, at that point in time, XL 4-star beef was no longer discharging? Have you checked the new data? And the response, and I'm paraphrasing a lot, the relisting of nutrients for cause unknown is simply correlated to a delisting error. So, just an error, should have been listed all along. The city also questioned at that time, shouldn't there be a correlation between nutrients and nuisance algae? That's another potential possibility for delisting. At that point, DEQ's response, and this is the third one, in order to, the delisting requires water quality data to demonstrate beneficial uses, are no longer impaired. So unless you have data that proves it's no longer impaired, it's listed. And then at this point, the city of Nampa supports the delisting of Indian Creek for temperature due to natural background condition. And in the 2012, the response to their comments, DEQ responds and says, well, thanks for the comment, but after further evaluation, additional time is warranted to explore other methods and return it to Category 5, meaning still listed for temperature. So it wasn't identified in 2012. City said, yay, way to go. The comments from DEQ said, no, well, we reconsidered. It's now listed. And that's when the city filed its, in March of 2014, so we issued comments in 2012 about 2014. In response to this response from DEQ, the city filed its contested case. This is something White Peterson filed. And we ended up settling in July 8th, 2015. At that point in time, the settlement is, Nampa was allowed to phase in over time any water quality-based temperature limits. So that was the settlement to the argument of the 2012. And that essentially gave the city of Nampa 15 years to address temperature that shows up in our permit. DEQ would also work cooperatively with Nampa to resolve the temperature limits. And DEQ was to develop a TMDL for Indian Creek for temperature in the fall of 2015. It still has not occurred. In 2014 integrated report, which occurred, so the city's comments would have been filed in October 2016. So at that point, going down the process, the city supported the sediment, and so they had performed a sediment and bacteria TMDL on Indian Creek. The city supported that, primarily because we can easily meet those, and it adds some finality. And for that, DEQ, for the most part, says thanks for the comments. And then the city does not support Category 5 listing for temperature, since there is no rationale or insufficient scientific data to support the impairment, and suggest moving it to Category 3, which, as Matt explained, is a lesser, Category 3 is lacking data. It made sense to the city. At that point, DEQ responded and said there was some data logger information in 2011 and 2012 where the max temperature exceeded 19 degrees C, and therefore Indian Creek should be listed for temperature. So that's the history of the integrated report. We've been looking at this. It's been back and forth since 2008. And so now we have another opportunity today to comment on the 2016 integrated report. But I think we need to consider a few things, and this is why we asked for today's meeting, to have an opportunity to discuss a few things. Which way do we want to go? I wish I had more time to evaluate all of the information, the Harriman the citizens alternative and other things, but we are where we are. These comments are due by August 6th. So any questions on the previous comments or where we got to? So to think about how we comment on the 2016 integrated report. The question really, I think, is about certainty. The city has an opportunity to look at it in lots of different angles. And that's why I don't know that there's an easy recommendation. If the city chooses the area that we're primarily talking about is the movement of Indian Creek to 4B status. This is the connection to the Boise River phosphorus TMDL. So if the city wanted certainty today, we could say we agree. That TMDL is in place. We'll agree with that TMDL. The limits that are on the Nampa plant are defined. They're based on that TMDL. And we would move forward with relative certainty that the permit that exists in Nampa would be firm, and we would move forward with that and build the improvements as we've identified in the facility plan. It does not, the reality is it does not consider in-stream water quality of Indian Creek. That's true. So that's one option. That's probably the most certain option. If we want to consider not part of the Boise River TMDL, saying Boise River TMDL may be good, but maybe it's not appropriate for Indian Creek, then what we have to consider is what would a TMDL in Indian Creek look like? We don't have data we haven't developed a TMDL. It hasn't been fleshed through the process of public comment period and all the people that might want to comment on a TMDL. But it's certainly an option. They are a scientific study based on available data and water quality models. The results of an Indian Creek specific nutrient TMDL are really somewhat unknown. I don't know. I can't stand before you and testify which direction those permit limits would be, whether they would be more restrictive or less restrictive. The only thing I do know is that the Nampa wastewater facility is a higher proportion of Indian Creek than it is of the Boise River. We know that. So we have some options. So these are the options as we see them, and there could be other options. Mark has been working with us, been working with Brown and Caldwell to try to come up with some options, and so I have options of options. And one that's not presented is, maybe the most certain answer is, we agree with that TMDL. So first of all, our comments, the easy one, right? We can make this recommendation. This is regarding sediment and E. coli. So our comment, our recommended comment would be, the city appreciates the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality's efforts over the last several years to complete the sediment and bacteria TMDL for the lower Boise River tributaries. This document establishes a scientific and defensible approach to improving water quality in Indian Creek and the lower Boise River watershed. Given that the city is already achieving the requirements for sediment and bacteria described in the TMDL, the city supports its listing as a 4A, impaired waters with EPA-approved TMDL for sediment and E. coli. So primarily, we're already meeting it. Seems like, why not? And it's been scientifically based. It'd be pretty hard to argue against that. Plus, it really doesn't impact the city. Now comes the more difficult ones. So an option, this is regarding the nutrient question. And we have two options. One is more, maybe more pointed than the other. And there could be a third option. This one is not listed in there. Could be a third option. And again, in the interest of time, we didn't write that one. This one, the first, an option could be, not listed, is City of Nampa agrees that the TMDL on the Boise River is accurate. It reflects Nampa's position or reflects Indian Creek, and the City of Nampa appreciates that. Thank you very much. Another option would be Indian Creek is a highly modified system, the discharge from which is diverted during significant portions of the year to irrigation systems. Given this unique nature of Indian Creek, it may be necessary to further consider the impacts of the Nampa wastewater discharge and other discharges on the impairment of beneficial uses for both Indian Creek and the lower Boise River, specifically for the cause unknown listing in Category 5. Some of the rationale is we acknowledge the uniqueness of Indian Creek, and it provides an opportunity for additional discussion. Another option might be roughly the same question. Instead, we would say, given the unique nature of Indian Creek, it is necessary to further consider. Moving may to is, to give a little bit more point to say, it's time to look at it. I don't have an opinion one way or t'other on how this would work. If we want to keep all, I guess, more open, we stick with may. If we're willing to go down, committed to go down that path, then maybe is the right one. I don't know how to answer that question. I don't have sufficient data to say what that answer would be. And again, both acknowledge the uniqueness of Indian Creek, and really there is the third option of we accept that the Boise River TMDL for nutrients is appropriate, and thank you very much. That's the difficult. This is, we need some direction. I can go forward with the temperature one if you want, or we could pause here if you have a comment, or we could change that. Certainly Mark's here, and if we need to word it differently, we're open to that. But again, the reason that these are important is how it links to all the different pieces as Matt pointed.
I would like to go through the temperature options first.
Certainly. Temperature, the city of Nampa has been consistent about discussing temperature. We've been consistent from 2008 to present. And so we're recommending, well, there's two options in that, same thing. A little less, more open and more pointed. So the comment could be, the city does not support the Category 5 listing of Indian Creek for temperature. It is the city's belief that there is insufficient reliable scientific data to support a finding that the relevant segments are impaired by temperature. These segments are more appropriate for Category 3, which includes segments for which there is insufficient data to determine if the beneficial uses are being attained or impaired. The delisting of Indian Creek for temperature is supported by the city, in addition to the use of additional data and consideration of natural background conditions for the delisting. The city agrees that Indian Creek would naturally be a small desert stream with limited shade and suggests this should be considered in all future impaired determinations. This is consistent with what the city has said in all of the previous comments. And this implores DEQ to look at the steps that outlined in the contested case and the settlement. Another option could be essentially the same thing, except we are a little stronger on the situation of Indian Creek. So essentially all the same, except the city believes that Indian Creek would naturally be a small intermittent desert stream or dry creek bed with limited shade, and suggests this should be considered in all future impairment determinations. And there's infinite other options of how we could respond. Trying to connect the dots. The temperature one is the connect the dots one from previous city comments. The nutrients one is kind of some of the same. And it really is a matter of, you know, the rationale again on temperature is consistent with previous city comments and implores DEQ to follow what we've already agreed to in a settlement. So this is really, this is where the risk is. How far or which direction is the city willing to take the risk, particularly in the nutrient side?
Mayor, if I could ask a question. So Michael, so is the temperature, according to IDEQ and EPA, an important ingredient for the nutrients? Is that what they're looking at?
There, Mayor, Councilor Rodriguez, it's two different conditions. One's temperature limit and nutrients is another limit, as well as sediment and bacteria.
Right, but they're in the same water flow.
All of these are regarding Indian Creek.
Right, and these go step to step, so that's what I'm thinking, does one domino affect the other?
Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, you can have bacteria TMDL and all the rest you would not. Would be
Oh, I
fine.
see.
Each one is looked at, I believe, yeah, got the
Oh,
head nod,
okay.
independently.
So is the Indian Creek much cleaner in its assigned categories than the Boise River?
Mayor, Councilman
I'm just
Rodriguez,
curious.
I don't know that I have sufficient data to be able to say where.
Yeah.
I suppose it would depend on where you look, right? Is Indian Creek, at which point of Indian Creek is more or less clean than which part of Boise River?
Well, our levels are pretty much the same throughout the Indian Creek, but I'm sure the temperature changes as does the weather, the natural part of it. And I don't know how we can assume the strength for fitting or complying with the temperature needs of the EPA. That's what has me concerned, and I'm not sure how we're going to attain that.
The facility plan provides an alternative that meets the limits that are in the permit today. So we can meet those limits.
But I think, as
That
we
would
discussed,
include the-
CUNA has the same issue, and they can't meet those goals of temperature. Is it because of the style well, because they don't have a temperature issue? They're paying it.
Well, Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, I can't speak for the city of CUNA. Their permit was issued, the city of Nampa actually commented on the city of CUNA's permit, specifically for, their permit has, if I recall, I'm going off memory here, so it could be wrong. But the permit that they requested, the city of CUNA had a new permit, different than Nampa that has an existing permit. And in their new permit, they requested a phosphorus limit of 0.07 parts per million. The city of Nampa opposed that limit, considering that it wasn't determined that that's the right number. They eventually got a permit that has a 0.07 parts per million phosphorus. I don't recall on the temperature whether they have one or not.
I see, okay.
Mayor? Michael, I have a question from page 6 under the DEQ response. Second comment. It looks like, since we're talking about water temperature, you referred to a couple items I just want to follow up on. It looks like they did do some scientific, they collected some data, at least temperature, that they supplied. Is that correct?
Based on the comments, that's what, and if you look at the comments, particularly on page 6 is what you were saying?
Yep.
Yeah, page 6 is, that's where they indicate that they provided some temperature data. And at that point, it did not meet 19 degrees C.
Showed 17 times it was over 19, and then 2 times it exceeded 22. And then I know the temp goes lower for the other part of the year. It doesn't show what the temp is registered at least I can't see. Maybe my eyes are a little small. It shows that it exceeded 13. Is that your understanding of what the limit is? Between October 15th and June 30th?
Mayor, Councilman Hogerman, there's two, the tricky part with what's written in here is two segments. There's the sugar to the mouth and then the sugar to New York Canal. The temperature limit on sugar to New York Canal is actually lower than the limit from sugar to the mouth. Sugar to the mouth, the limit is 19 degrees centigrade.
Madam Mayor? Michael, but then the question is on the water is, can we possibly make any kind of difference no matter what we do for the overall creek on temperature?
Mayor, Councilman Skog, we can meet the permit by either chilling the water.
Well, I understand we can meet the permit, but does that make any difference in the overall creek a half mile downstream?
Councilman Skog, I don't know that it does, but that doesn't change. So the permit that the city has and the limits that are there are real. If they're not met by the times included, fines and penalties are also real. And if we willfully don't meet those limits that are in the permit, there's potential jail time for someone. And so I don't know, regardless of whether it solves the creek, from a person, from the administrator to determine how do I meet the permit, that's the focus. And I think whether or not the creek satisfactorily ends up at that result, from my position, not from the philosophical position, but from the position of having to meet that permit, I don't know that I can't, it doesn't, I don't know how to change it. The only way we can affect the permit is to change the temperature limit on the permit. Whether the creek gets cold or hot or 1,000,000 degrees, the permit says what the permit says, and we have to meet that. And major fines and penalties happen. I can't emphasize that enough. There are cities that are facing fines. There are people in jail because they chose not to meet those conditions. And that's, from an administrator perspective, those are the directions that I think you asked me to provide that information. Beyond that, what's right for the creek or not right for the creek, I don't know.
Fellow council members, Mayor, Michael, I understand and appreciate your explanation. Your job's to implement what we tell you, give us the information, we make the decisions, and you do a good job. We don't have time to delay this decision on what we want in this letter or our comments for the city. We do have time to follow a parallel path and discuss that at later meetings, and we're going to pursue that, correct?
Mayor, Councilman Scogg, that's correct. That's what we proposed, yes. We believe that's the case. The question then becomes how, that's why the comments are so important. How open do you want them? How narrow? If it's open, I mean, some easy answer may be keep it as open as we can so all options are available. How you do that, one of the things that we've heard in a lot of the conversations is, you know, what you will get from these comments is a response from DEQ. They are required to respond to comments in the integrated report. We will receive comments.
Madam Mayor, Michael, and I know you have said it, just to recall my memory, what's the time window normally when responses are received from DEQ once ours are submitted?
Our best estimate, 30 to 60 days. I would have to look up statutorily.
It's pretty quick then, it's
Well,
not
there's
6 months or, okay.
Mayor, Councilman Hogerman, there's a statutory requirement that they have to respond, and what that is, I can't recall. Unless they're Again, it's an administrative law process, so if they get a ton of comments, they could probably get a time extension.
Excuse me, Mayor, are we supposed to be commenting in and deciding on these options? Is that what you want from us?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilman Bruner, or no, I mean, the other, an alternative is no comment, right? Make no comment and it just goes where it goes.
Let me just at this point, just quick discussion, I guess, and I'm gonna go backwards on number 3 at this point in time, unless somebody convinces me otherwise, I'm in favor of option number 2. And I'm not in favor of necessarily either one on comment number 2. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm not trying to, but what I'm wondering if it may be a little compromise from using it may to it is to maybe it seems, or something of that sort, or it appears. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Further comment?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Bruner, I agree with comment 3, option 2 on the temperature as my preference. I'd like comment number 2 and option 1, but I liked your suggestion also.
Bruce, did I hear you correctly that on comment 2, option 1?
Yes,
Okay.
on the phosphorus.
Is there any further comment on that?
Mayor Kling, Michael, you mentioned risk, and I just made a note to myself when you were talking at comment 3, option 2, what risk are we talking about?
Excuse me. If comment option 2, the
Comment 3, option 2.
The risk on the temperature TMDL is, we don't know what that answer is going to be there either. It's just, it hasn't occurred yet, and we do have a limit. DEQ has said that they would do one, but it hasn't happened yet.
So what risk are we talking about then, or is there any risk at this point? We're just waiting for a response.
Mayor, Councilor Haverfield, this is one where it's fairly limited risk, I think. What we hope is that we have an answer in time to get a change. If they don't change it, then we really can't affect the permit. And that permit limit is effective 2031.
For the temperature?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor, Michael, you said that this is essentially saying what we have been saying, is that correct? Over the last decade?
For options 3, comment number 3,
The emphasis on intermittent and Dry Creek bed,
are in and out, I think we've used some of those statements before.
okay. But you referred to them delisting, us thinking perhaps we secured a victory, them relisting, and saying the delisting was a clerical error. I know that government is not efficient and drops the ball sometimes. I just have a very difficult time understanding something of such significance that they would delist, relist, and say that the delisting was a clerical error. And then you mentioned that at that time, it seems like maybe there was leverage that we had as a city, and if I'm prying into legal matters, but you mentioned that our legal counsel at that time, Wade Peterson, prior administration, none of us were here. We're all fairly new folks up here from the date that you're referring to, that there was a settlement, use that language, settlement. When I hear the word settlement, it has some sense of binding. And you talk about the permit, and that the result of that settlement was that we just got extra time to comply with the temperature limits. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct, the settlement, settlement date is July 8th, 2015. Certainly can. Okay. Settlement date is July 8th, 2015. We certainly can share those.
Okay, so when you say settlement, we were making a certain case, they were making another case, and we voluntarily agreed to the settlement with legal counsel's advice. That, when I say we, that prior administration, we in solidarity with the city.
Correct, the city at that time agreed to the settlement.
Okay.
May I
May-
see that document? Thank you.
So Michael, since that time, there hasn't been any other change based on the decision related to that. Is that correct?
Excuse me, Mayor, there has not been a TMDL on Indian Creek, and Indian Creek is still listed for temperature.
Mayor Kling, if I could. Okay, so, Michael, if we took comment 3, option number 2, and we agreed to that, and we submitted it to IDEQ, what would be the next step? What would be the result of this request?
Mayor,
And also, I'm sorry, and also in terms of dollars to the city.
Mayor, Councilman Rodriguez, the dollars would yet to be determined. What will happen is DEQ will respond and either agree or disagree with the comments and provide a point that says, here's why we agree and here's why we don't agree. That then establishes the next step for the city. Either we call it even, and we're starting to get into legal stuff, but then we,
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to figure out that we can look at this comment and go by it, but what's gonna be the results? And that's all I was asking. That it's like throwing up a coin up in the air and falling where it falls.
Mayor, Councilor, and Rodriguez, temperature kind of is in that point. Temperature's kind of there. I don't know that there's a whole lot of more certain or less certain. It is temperature listed. How does it get delisted? You have to prove that you're meeting the beneficial uses as identified by DEQ.
I see. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, fellow
Yes.
council members, I think we all wish we had time to get a wastewater legal expert opinion, and I hope we get to that point through this dual process. But we don't have that today. No disrespect to current city attorney, that's just not his specialty, and that's a very unique specialty. I want to get to that point with the law firm eventually.
Mayor, I have one question for Matt. It is Matt, right? From Brown for Carlton. Are you, in your line of work, this is what you guys do. I'm just wondering, how common is a clerical error that occurred not once but twice, if I understand, for our city, on delisting and relisting? Is that,
Mayor,
I'm just wondering if it was only us.
Councilman Huckabee,
Yeah.
to my knowledge, this is the one I've seen, but I've also worked closely with only a handful of cities.
Okay.
I could ping the company and see where others have had that happen, but, you know, being mainly based in Boise and mainly dealing with Nampa, this is the one that comes to mind for me.
Okay, yeah. I've just talked to some people and they just, again, I know government drops the ball. We all drop the ball. It seems like this is unique and not once but twice that they're saying that the listing, delisting, relisting was a clerical error as opposed to based on the merits of course, we would like to believe that it was based on the merits and careful consideration. But again, I think legal's looking at the settlement. Was that what you supplied? I'd like to look at that another time, so I understand that's being circulated. That would maybe for public, for all of us to be able to look at that, so that could be passed down. Thank you.
So at almost 6:20, we have a meeting starting in here at 6:30. I think, Michael, you have recommended, the comment number 1 is the staff's recommendation.
Correct.
Bruce had commented a preference on comment 2, option 1. And Darrell had commented, suggested comment 3, option 2. So coming back to what different ones have commented, I'd like to ask if there's any more comment from council, just very quickly, from individual council members if they have any comments on the recommendations that have been suggested at this point.
Mayor Kling, I'm gonna, would prefer comment 3, option number 2.
Comment 3, option number 2?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Just
And
for the sake of clarity, are we looking for just one of the 3 comments or one of the 5 comments?
3.
There's
All
2 options. Pardon me. We're looking for
Comment
all,
1,
all 3 options then. So 1, and then whatever of comment 2 would be added to comment 1?
no, it would, go ahead.
Mayor, so these are on each individual things. Option 1 is on sediment and
Okay.
bacteria.
Right.
Or comment number 1. Comment number 2 is on nutrients, and comment number 3 is on temperature.
Okay. And that's what
An option, I mean, certainly, the council could choose, make no comment.
right. And I understood that's what you were saying, but I wasn't certain if you were talking about just choosing comment 1 and calling it good as being the staff's recommendation.
Well, that is certainly that is an option for council.
Okay, Mayor Kling, my preference would be comment 1, comment 2, option 1, and comment 3, option 2.
Actually, I think, isn't comment 1 and comment 2, option 1, they're rival comments, right? Or am I not reading that right?
Are you referring to comment 2?
Staff recommended 1.
No, comment number 1 is a separate comment, and the staff has recommended that one. Comment number 2 related to nutrients. The difference between option 1 and option 2 is just literally the words may be versus is. It's a stronger statement.
So basically, we're just signing off on staff recommending comment 1, that there isn't an alternative to that.
Staff has not provided another alternative.
Thank you.
But no comment is also an option on
Ye-
all of
yes,
these.
okay.
That
No
council
comment
makes
on all
no
of them.
comment on any of them, or chooses to comment on 1, 2, or 3 individually, or no comment.
Yeah, okay, just quickly, I would actually support comment 2, option 2, the stronger language, declaring that it is necessary to further consider the matter. And then comment 3, option 2.
Mayor,
Yes.
thank you. Councilman Brunner, when you were inserting the word appears, was that on comment 2, option 2?
I said it seems,
Seems.
or
Or
something
seems
like
or
it
appears.
seems or it appears. That was just a non-legal suggestion.
Just wanted to clarify that, thank you.
Kind of a compromise in my.
Would it be correct, Michael, to say that the difference between option 1 and option 2, it appears that we're trying to soften the language to give us a little bit more latitude. Hence, what I think I'm hearing you say is it's, rather than saying it may be versus it is, softening it to say
I'm
it
taking middle
seems.
ground.
You're really taking a middle
Middle
ground.
ground is
Uh-huh.
what I'm
Is that an option?
recommending.
Is that an option to use that word? Okay,
Mayor,
yes.
I would support that middle ground.
The middle ground of seems on comment 2. Okay,
Comment 2, option 1 or 2. I guess
actually, why wouldn't,
The same.
We're creating a
thing,
new
yeah.
option, it sounds like. The Darrell Bruder option.
The Bruner option.
The middle of the road.
Not with Aaron in the room.
Would it be safe to say,
option 3? Why don't we refer to it as option 3, and the word is it seems
Call it an
in
audible.
option number 3.
Okay,
That works, Madam Mayor.
that sounds
it
good.
seems or appears?
Seems,
Seems.
seems.
Mayor, and that's comment 3, option 2.
Comment 2, option 3.
Oh, okay, we're back there again.
So I believe what we've heard on, yeah,
I'll
basically, we would be there. Go for it.
make a motion if nobody shakes their head and don't do it, so, all right. Just as a citizen of America, it just makes me sad that we have to grovel to the bureaucracies. and that it doesn't really make a difference what we do on the temperature as far as we meet it. It doesn't make a difference 50 yards downstream as to the temperature of Indian Creek, and we still have to meet a permit. But that's the world we live in. With that, I'll make the motion that we approve comment number 2, option 1, with the Darrell Bruner option of changing the word to seems, or it seems. And then comment number 3, option 2 regarding temperature.
What about option 1?
Option 1, is that one not included?
Comment,
Comment 1?
sorry, gotta get these.
There's
No,
three comments.
Go back one more page. There you go.
Comment 1 with it seems.
Well, comment 1 is the one that there isn't an option on. That, so it's comment 2, it seems.
We're, you know, Mayor, we're either okaying or not okaying or not making a comment
Yeah.
on comment 1.
On comment 1.
There's there's not two options.
Oh.
The other two, you got, well, I've got it.
So accepting comment 1.
Accepting, my motion is, excuse me, accepting comment 1, accepting comment 2, option 1, with the change of it seems as recommended by Councilman Bruner, and then comment 3, option 2 regarding temperature.
Got it. I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call.
Rodriguez,
Yes.
Brunner,
Yes.
Hogaboom,
Yes.
Levi,
Yes.
Haverfield,
Yes.
Stog.
Yes.
Thank you.
Michael, thank you for your work. Council, thank you for your consideration. And I would stand for a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved?
And second.